I'd always been the dutiful child, the one who never questioned, never rebelled. But the day I said no for the first time, I felt the air crackle with a new hostility, turning me into an enemy under the very roof I called home. I couldn't shake the feeling of my mother's disappointed gaze piercing right through me as she stood beside my stepfather. Their silence felt like a judgment, thickening the air. It was the first time I'd ever openly defied them, choosing my future over my stepbrother's spiral. I had expected guilt to flood over me for abandoning family duty, but instead, a simmering anger burned beneath my skin, a resentment for sacrificing so much for someone I barely knew. Now, ostracized within what was once my home, I realized I'd stepped over a boundary that couldn't be unreached. Was it wrong to want something for myself amidst everyone else's chaos? Their unspoken disapproval hung between us, a testament to the uncharted territory I'd entered, leaving me questioning if my own desires justified the turmoil in our lives. The living room felt like a trap. The air was tight, suffocating, and the walls seemed to close in with every silent second. Mom sat on the edge of the couch, hands clenched, knuckles white, every muscle taut. She was a grenade waiting to explode. I could feel the tremors of everything unsaid simmering beneath the surface. I stood there, back against the wall, heart pounding out a rhythm of rebellion I never knew I had, while Mom's words pierced like daggers. "You've changed," she spat, each syllable sharp and accusing. Her eyes bore into me, searching for the child she wanted me to be, the one she swore she'd crafted through her endless lectures and sacrifice. I felt the heat rising in my chest, scorching away the careful layers of compliance I'd wrapped myself in all these years. Words threatened to erupt, a flood of emotions finally unchained. But they tangled with fear, twisted by the love-hate bind of family, robbing me of breath. Everything was too loud and too quiet at once. The ceiling fan buzzed, a dull, rhythmic blade whirring above, cutting the air in a cruel parody of calm. I swallowed hard, tasting the bitter edge of truth and fear, feeling the weight of generations pressing down. My breath came shallow and fast, like I was racing against something invisible, something bigger than myself. She leaned forward, eyes ablaze with a fire I recognized too well. "Why don't you ever listen?" Her voice cracked, sending shrapnel into the silence between us. It was a haunting symphony of guilt and anger that played on repeat, each note a reminder of the paths not taken, the expectations unmet. My palms were slick with sweat as I pushed away from the wall, a jolt of adrenaline and decision coursing through me. The air was electric, charged with a static I could almost see. No escape, no turning back. "Maybe I don't want to," I said, my voice shaking but determined, each word a brick laid on a path I was finally daring to step onto. The silence that followed was thick, a suffocating quilt pressing down as we looked at each other across a chasm too wide to bridge with words. Her face paled, a mix of shock and betrayal carving deep lines into her features. Her eyes softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again, an old defense mechanism snapping back into place. The tension hung in the air, a fragile thread stretching between apology and anger, ready to snap with one wrong move. She stood, the creak of the couch a tired sigh in the charged air. Her lips were a tight line, a barricade against a transgression she struggled to name. As she turned away, the room breathed again, releasing some of its invisible tension. My heart still pounded, the rhythm finding a steady pace. This was far from over, I knew, but a voice inside whispered that maybe, just maybe, we could survive the storm to come. The door clicked shut behind me, a brittle finality that echoed in the stillness of the room. I leaned against it, the chill of the wood seeping through my shirt and into my bones, an unwelcome reminder that everything had changed. The confrontation downstairs had been explosive, words flying like daggers, each finding their mark in the tenderest parts of my soul. Now, in the quiet aftermath, I was alone with the weight of what I had done. The silence of my room felt like a heavy shroud, suffocating in its solitude but strangely liberating all the same. I exhaled, my breath a trembling sigh that lingered before dissolving into the emptiness. With slow, deliberate movements, I turned away from the door, each step a small rebellion against the chaos outside these walls. My world had shifted, and yet everything here remained the same, untouched by the storm I had barely survived. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under my weight. My hands, clammy and cold, found my temples, pressing against the pulse that pounded relentlessly, a drumbeat of anxiety that refused to be silenced. My head drooped forward, the world narrowing to just the space between my knees, as if that small focus could somehow ground me, keep me from splintering. Inside my mind, chaos raged. There was a savage satisfaction in standing up for myself, a blistering, brief spark of triumph, yet it was smothered by a creeping doubt that coiled tighter with every heartbeat. Had I gone too far? Could they, ever forgive me? My chest constricted with the weight of that uncertainty, a vice clamping down, pushing all rational thought to the edges. My fingers curled into fists, nails biting into flesh, an anchor against the emotional tempest. The rage simmered just below the surface, a slow burn that threatened to consume me if I let it. I had hurled my truths like stones, propelled by a desperate need to be heard, and somewhere along the line, I had discovered something unexpected, a voice buried beneath layers of fear and compliance. But that discovery came at a cost, and now I was left to wander this new landscape alone. The room was both sanctuary and prison, a place of safety that felt increasingly like exile. I didn't want to face the wreckage nestled in the quiet corners of my mind, but retreat no longer felt like an option. I was exposed, vulnerable, and for the first time, fiercely alive. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with emotions unspoken, but I held fast. This room, this solitude, was my proving ground. If I could survive this, face this raw, relentless hell of doubt and isolation, then maybe, just maybe, I could find a way forward. In the muffled silence, I crossed the threshold from regret to resolve. I would not be crushed. Not now. Not ever. The room felt too small, the air thick with a residue of old arguments and silences that had festered for far too long. As soon as I saw him standing there in the doorway, I knew what was coming. My stepbrother had this way of entering a room, not with a presence, but with an energy that seemed to crackle quietly before it burst. Today, it was subdued, tightened around an impending storm. I leaned against the dining table, the edge pressing into my spine, grounding me as my stepbrother stepped further inside. His eyes held that familiar mix of emotions, frustration, and a hint of desperation. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carefully controlled yet laced with something sharper, an edge I recognized all too well. I sighed, already weary from the conversation that hadn't yet begun. "What about this time?" My words dropped between us, intentionally soft, aware of the weight they carried. "It's about the family," he began, a practiced opening line. His words were edged with accusation, each one a mirror reflecting back the fractures of our patched-together family. "You're tearing us apart with this, you know?" I wanted to laugh, to shake my head at his naive simplicity, as if things had ever been whole enough to tear apart. "Am I really, though? Or is it just finally coming to light?" He flinched, just slightly, but it was enough. Enough for me to catch a glimpse of that old wound he never could hide. We had danced around this particular minefield for years, each of us pretending to play civil for the sake of the adults who had brought us together. A family not by choice, but by circumstance. "You always do this," he muttered, pacing to the window and looking out, as if the view might offer answers. "You always act like you're above it all, like you don't need us." "Maybe that's because I don't," I admitted, feeling the honesty roll off my tongue with a surprising ease. His head whipped around, eyes wide, a flash of hurt as raw as an open wound. "God, you're so self-centered," he spat out. Or maybe it was spit out. The venom in his voice made distinctions unnecessary. "Do you even care?" "Care? Of course, I care," I replied, my voice rising in spite of myself. "But maybe I'm just done caring for everyone else's mess." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full, charged with the unspoken. It was the moment when the truth might finally be dragged into the light, examined for what it was rather than what we wished it to be. "No one's asking you to fix things. Just don't destroy them," he pleaded softly, a flicker of vulnerability he rarely allowed. For a second, I hesitated, caught between the familiar pull of family obligation and the jagged need for independence. But it was only a second. "I can't promise that," I whispered. He nodded, a reluctant acceptance of a stalemate too well-worn to break here and now. The confrontation faded, leaving us standing there, inches apart yet miles away. The house felt cavernous, every footstep echoing off walls that had absorbed years of muffled conversations and unspoken resentments. I slipped quietly into the worn armchair by the window, a moth-eaten cushion digging into my back, grounding me in a moment I wasn't sure I belonged to. Outside, the world continued, oblivious to the turmoil stirring within these walls. The rain traced erratic paths down the glass, mirroring the tears I refused to shed. I clung to memories like anchor points, wondering how the tethers of love had wound so tightly into chains of obligation. A decade ago, this house vibrated with laughter, our voices merging in harmony, a patchwork quilt of warmth. We weren't bound by blood, but back then, the bonds felt forged in something just as strong. I could almost hear the faint echo of my younger self, desperately trying to fit into roles that always seemed a size too big. It was like wearing a coat meant for someone else, slightly oversized, ill-fitting, but somehow expected to become mine just the same. My gaze settled on a family photo perched precariously on the mantel, the faces smiling so convincingly that they almost seemed real. Back then, I believed if I smiled wide enough, spoke gently enough, maybe the sense of alienation would fade into acceptance. But here I was, still an outsider cloaked in familiar skin, struggling to weave myself into the fabric of this fractured mosaic. Each family gathering replayed in my mind like a worn-out film reel, the scenes overexposed with suppressed tensions and unfulfilled promises. I remember birthdays where cake and laughter masked the undercurrent of silent battles, the casual dismissals wrapped in well-meaning attempts to draw me in closer. Every holiday, a reminder of expectations unmet, traditions that felt like translated songs I couldn't quite grasp. The ache to belong pulsed in my veins, a longing that often clashed with my own dreams, those precious aspirations I kept tucked away like confidences whispered in the dark. It seemed that to belong here, I had to tuck pieces of myself into the shadows, pieces that felt vital yet foreign in this landscape of togetherness. I pondered the paths not taken, the opportunities abandoned in favor of this commitment, this transient concept of family I so desperately craved yet resented. In a world built from second chances and happenstance connections, I wondered where my place truly was. The rain continued its relentless assault outside, a steady percussion beat against the silence enveloping me. My heart thudded in rhythm with each drop, reminding me of a voice unheard yet undeniably present, telling tales of futures unfurling beyond the horizon. As the evening shadows crept through the room, I knew the longing wouldn't simply ebb away, couldn't be easily erased by well-meaning words or forced smiles. I reached for the photo, tracing each face, each frown hidden beneath smiles. At that moment, I realized I had a choice. The acceptance I sought couldn't be handed down like an heirloom. It was something I had to carve out myself, perhaps beyond these walls. Hearing her voice was like finding a lifeline in a storm, grounding, even if only for a moment. I sat there on the edge of my bed, phone cradled between my ear and shoulder, while my mind spun like leaves caught in a gust. Lauren always knew how to speak in a way that made me feel seen, like peeling back layers without ever drawing blood. "Hey," she said, her voice warm, familiar, yet carrying an intangible weight. "It's been too long." "Yeah," I replied, trying to mask the ache that seeped into my words. "Life's been complicated." Her laughter, soft and genuine, broke over the line. "When isn't it?" There's a swell of comfort and guilt. I hadn't fully let anyone else in on what things have really been like. Family expectations, the quiet strangulation of invisible ties. Maybe I was scared of what saying it out loud might change. "How's your mom?" Lauren pressed, unknowingly hitting the tender spot I'd been nursing. "Still the same," I sighed. "Fighting battles that aren't mine to fight. It's like I'm stuck in a loop." "What about you, though? How are you holding up?" That question pulled at something raw inside. A pulse of relief and resistance tangled together because it was rare, someone asking directly about me without it being prelude to another duty. I hesitated, a pause clinging to the silence like it might offer an escape. "I'm managing, I think. But there's so much pressure to stay," I murmured, almost whispering, as if fearing louder utterance might make it more real. "You know," Lauren's voice turned soft, almost like a hug I couldn't receive through the phone. "It's okay to want more for yourself." Her words danced through my hesitation, leaving ripples of something that might be hope. "But leaving," I faltered, "it feels like I'd be abandoning everything." "Sometimes taking care of yourself means stepping away," she nudged gently. "Being happy doesn't mean you're selfish." A sharp intake of breath was my only response. For a moment, just one, the world on my shoulders felt a fraction lighter, a glimpse into a world where I wasn't tethered by obligations that weren't entirely mine. "What if I can't do it alone?" I asked, barely above a whisper, that fear tainted with vulnerability. "You're never really alone," Lauren assured, her voice like a living promise. "I know things aren't simple, but you've got me. And maybe, just maybe, that's where strength begins." As we talked, the tight knot in my chest eased a little, possibilities unfurling one whispered truth at a time. I knew this conversation was just a spark against years of conditioning, but it was a start. A start that might light a path towards something worth pursuing, even if I wasn't sure yet where it led. But right then, in that moment, her voice held me steady in the storm, and I held on to that lifeline for dear life. The clatter of silverware against plates was the only sound that filled the room, slicing through the silence with surgical precision. My dad, seated at the head of the table, cleared his throat in that deliberate way he had, a signal, a command. The kitchen air seemed heavier, infused with the scent of rosemary and something unspoken. I could feel the weight of it pressing against me, thickening the space between us all. Across from me, my mom dissected her salad with methodical focus, each stab of her fork a punctuation mark in our quiet transaction of civility. "This is good," isn't it?" She announced to no one in particular, the phrase hanging like a loose thread begging to be pulled. I nodded, unwilling to take the bait of her approval. The roast chicken sat in the center, state offering at this altar of passive aggression. My sister reached for a roll, her arm brushing against mine, electric and nearly punitive with the tension it carried. "Pass the butter," she said, her voice level, calculated. In our house, words were weapons, each silence a calculated maneuver in this ongoing family chess game. I obeyed, sliding the small dish toward her, ignoring the silent rebuke in her eyes. Her expression was a mirror reflecting back my own exhaustion, a shared understanding that this was yet another round of the same old dance. "No one's touching the potatoes," my dad observed, his gaze sweeping the table like a spotlight, searching for signs of dissent. His smile was so thin it could have been sliced with the bread knife, a performative gesture in politeness. "You know, the kind your grandma used to make." The mention of grandma was a gambit, a nod to heritage, heavier than the china plates we inherited from her. I inhaled deeply, tried to soak the air with my resolve not to be baited. "I think they need more salt," I said, feigning nonchalance, earning a fleeting glare from my mother. Her sharp inhale was nearly lost in the awkward shuffle as my father reached for the salt shaker, as if the gesture would rebalance the precarious equilibrium. There was a long pause, during which I could hear nothing but the faint ticking of the kitchen clock, time mocking our shared discomfort. My sister finally spoke again. "Did you hear about what happened with Sarah?" she asked, shifting the spotlight from table tension to town's gossip, skillful in her redirection. We each took the opportunity to retreat into our own thoughts, the words flowing on autopilot. When the plates were nearly empty, my dad placed his fork and knife down with ceremonial precision. The meal was winding down, but not the unresolved tension, which lingered like the clinging scent of rosemary. Something unspoken yawned wide between us, a chasm that neither banal conversation nor ancestral recipes could bridge. As we scraped our chairs back from the table, I thought of what fresh maneuver tomorrow would demand, how I would have to navigate again. The air in the kitchen was thick with the smell of burnt toast and something unspoken. I stood at the counter, my fingers nervously tracing the patterned edge of the wooden table. She was there, stirring a mug of her favorite jasmine tea, the steam twirling up like escaping ghosts. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the silence between us was louder than any words. "Mom," I said, voice cracking like the brittle crust of the bread she loved to butter too thickly. "We never talk, you know, about how it feels, living in two different worlds under the same roof." Her shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn away from the window. Rain began tapping the glass, a gentle percussion accompanying the heavy feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. "What do you want me to say?" Her voice was a mix of weariness and something else, something sharp and unwilling to dull. I leaned against the counter, waiting for her to look at me. When she finally did, her eyes were pools of unreadable emotion, but I felt the ripples of regret and love crashing against the shores of my resolve. She was tired, I could see that, stretched thin between obligations and silent dreams that never materialized. I need to know why it always felt like there were only enough pieces of you to give to one of us," I confessed. My heart drummed in sync with the rain, each beat a plea for an end to this hollow hurt. She sighed, a sound dripping with years of unspoken battles. "You were always strong, you know. Always ready to take on the world by yourself." Her gaze softened, but I was already bracing for the rest. "Your brother, he needed more. Needs more. Always has." The words stung, like seawater in fresh cuts. I nodded, swallowing the jagged lump in my throat. "I get it," I whispered. "But I needed you too, Mom. Someone has to understand that." Her hand twitched against the mug, and for a moment, I thought she might reach out. Instead, she pressed a palm to her temple, as if trying to hold the weight of past choices at bay. Her silence was both an answer and an agony, wrapping around my heart like barbed wire. "I'm here now," she said finally, the admission a tiny, trembling thing between us. But the words fell into the depths of everything we'd never said and everything we'd never be. The rain picked up as I stood there, the room heavy with our shared solitude and the aching knowledge that love sometimes breaks the easiest with those you can't stop caring about. "Mom," I began, the storm outside nothing compared to the tempest inside me. She turned away, looking out into the gray. The moment passed, unseen and untouched, yet leaving imprints on our souls. My suitcase was heavier than it should have been. Like it carried more than just clothes and books, something unseen, something whispered. I stood by the cracked hallway mirror, my hand grazing its surface. Each creak in the wooden floorboards was a reminder, begging me to stay, even as I knew I had to go. I hesitated at the threshold, feeling the cool draft of impending change. The door seemed to pulse with a breath of its own, inviting me to step through it. but leaving Mint grasping at dreams while letting go of everything comfortable, predictable. Faces from the past flickered in my mind, moments of laughter and tears, like a reel of old films stuck on repeat. Could they ever understand why I needed this? Would they call it a betrayal or simply a parting? As I took my first real steps into uncertainty, each one felt like shedding a layer of myself, a painful transformation that was somehow right and wrong, all at once. I carried years of whispered dreams, unspoken ambitions tucked into every seam of my suitcase. The house behind me groaned softly, settling like an old friend resigned to my decision. My parents were in the living room when I reached the last step of the staircase. Their silhouetted figures were static against the backdrop of evening light, caught between shadow and the remnants of golden hour. The television blared, a daily soundtrack I'd come to associate with home. Dad looked up first, his eyes meeting mine with a question hanging unspoken in the air. I wondered, just for a moment, if he could see the conviction beneath my fear. I gave him a smile, more a grimace, but it was all I had left to offer. Mom's knitting hands paused, suspended as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "I have to go," I said, breaking the spell. My voice didn't waver as I thought it might. It was surprisingly steady, a thread of defiance and hope binding each word. "I know," Dad finally replied, 2 words, heavy and resigned. His understanding barely masked the sadness. Silence unfolded between us, a chasm of everything unspoken, forgiveness perhaps, or regret. It was impossible to tell. I clutched the handle of my suitcase tighter, anchoring myself to the singular notion that this leap was necessary. "Take care of yourself," Mom said softly, an edge of a plea lingering in her voice, caught between acceptance and her own hidden hurts. My heart was pounding by then, each beat a chaotic drum urging me forward. I turned away before my resolve wavered, before the weight of their emotions drowned mine. Stepping out the door felt like shedding skin, a visceral release as if the threshold marked a rebirth. The street awaited, a slow breeze brushing against my cheek like a whisper of encouragement. Each step forward seemed to peel away layers of the past, a gradual lifting of burdens, a liberation underlined by the risk of everything unknown. The air outside felt different, almost charged with something I couldn't quite name. The kind of morning when the chill clings to your skin just enough to remind you of the promises those first glimmers of sunshine hold. And as I stood there, keys in hand, I couldn't help but feel that this was more than just a door I was closing. The front of the house, in its comforting familiarity, looked smaller somehow, like a place designed for someone I no longer was. Each step down the worn path felt significant, every crunch of the gravel underfoot a reminder of the journeys, both real and metaphorical, that had brought me here. I paused at the end, turning back to face the house, the scene of laughter, tears, and the whispered dreams I had once been so afraid to release into the wild. Inside those walls, I had known fierce love and unbearable loss, had danced with joy in the kitchen under twinkling fairy lights and curled up in corners, feeling the weight of the world pressing down. It all seemed so far away now, like memories from a life lived in another time or perhaps by another person entirely. As I watched my home fade into the background, I whispered to no one in particular, I finally understood that sometimes, the hardest roads lead to the most worthwhile destinations. I wanted to believe it, to embrace the cliché not as a tired adage, but as a hard-won truth forged in the fire of my own experience. A truth peppered with the knowledge that leaving didn't mean erasing. It meant evolving, carrying forward what mattered, and letting go of what laid heavy on the heart. Before me stretched the road, a ribbon of possibility veined with both uncertainty and hope. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, skin brushing leather worn smooth over years of gripping through storms literal and metaphorical. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp air that seemed imbued with a sense of clean slate, interrupted only by the rhythmic hum of the car's engine breathing to life. I thought about the scars I carried, not visible to others, but etched into the fiber of my being. Proof that I had lived, learned, and yes, sometimes lost, but hadn't allowed those moments to define my entirety. Instead, they were chapters in a book still being written, echoes of survival masked as just another layer of my expanding tapestry. As the house shrank in the rearview mirror, replaced gradually by trees lined like guardians on either side of the road, I knew this was my time to carve out a future not dictated by past pain or previous expectations. To venture into the unknown not with trepidation but with a quiet, determined courage. And in that moment, I realized freedom wasn't just the absence of confinement. It was the presence of potential, an exhilarating open-ended question I was finally brave enough to answer.